Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. This is a very quick video tonight. I just wanted to show people the world I live in on a day-to-day basis is sonic visualizer, and in this particular case I'm going to give an example of the loudness of a sound. And then because of the way that the phones and cameras are structured, it's very hard to tell what the absolute loudness of a sound is, because the phones are constantly adjusting the gain. So all the time I'm making comparisons to how loud is this sound compared to the other sound that's nearby. On the screen is a short segment, audio segment of one particular video, and that video is a cop cam, and it comes from batch 11 body cam 96, which is located, as you see here, on the Las Vegas shooting map on the west side of the Las Vegas Boulevard, halfway or a third of the way up from the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Mandalay Bay Road. Recently I've been looking at this video because it contains all 8 of the single shots from the theoretically .308 caliber weapon. But anyway, back to the sound. So one of the most common questions that I ask myself continually is, how loud is this sound? Because sound, as it travels, bad word, as it propagates over a distance, becomes less and less loud, or less and less intense, or the energy that it carries spreads over a bigger distance. Therefore, that little piece of energy that we intercept is less intense the further away from the source of the sound you are. I kind of look at sound as a beach ball on a beach with a bunch of people, and this beach ball is rolling around, and every person can poke at it, but each person pokes at it differently from a different angle on a different spot on the beach ball. Now this beach ball is 6 foot in diameter, and that's the way that sound is the beach ball is this sphere of sound emanating from a source, and each person that hears that sound may be located anywhere on, around, or above or below the beach ball, and their ears only are just about like putting your finger on the beach ball. You hear just a small portion of the energy of the entire sound that was created by the event that caused the sound itself. The sound is not the event. The event was something else. In this case, I'm mostly looking at gunshots. And for example, the muzzle blast, which, as we all know by now, is emitted out of the end of the barrel, caused by the expanding gases from the explosion that happened inside the chamber of the gun when the round was ignited. So, in this particular scene up here, I have a portion of Volley 5. And Volley 5 is that, middle of the whole action, 3 short bursts that were theoretically, shot towards the corner of Mandalay Bay and Mandalay Bay Road and the Boulevard. But anyway, so what we have here is a nice picture of some up and down waves, and these are caused by a siren. They're man-made, they're electronic-made, and they're very, very distinct from gunshot sounds, which, as we see here, are the up and down things. If I expand this out, the up and down signals here are the gunshots. Now on the top, once again, is a power spectrogram, which I have in the log scale at the moment. Let's change it down to a linear and increase the gain, and we can see, because of the color of the waves, the approximate intensity. And here we see that with these up and down waves being slightly less intense than the waves caused by the siren. Put it back on the log scale because I needed a little bit more detail. So for this particular burst, which consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, wait a minute, I don't quite have everything visible. Still 8. 8 supersonic cracks up here in the higher frequency range. Frequencies on the left-hand side here on a logarithmic scale in this case. And the lower frequency, which are the muzzle blast, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as we'd expect, the sonic waves lead the muzzle blast by some distance, by 0.326 seconds, or 326 roughly milliseconds on the front end. And then on the back end, we can go from peak to peak is 310.5 milliseconds, or about a third of a second. But what I wanted to point out is the intensity of the sound. Here we see that the intensity of the muzzle blast, which is in this middle panel log frequency plot of the waveform, they're pretty dark by comparison to the pretty bright siren. So regardless of what the phone is doing in terms of gain and amplitude adjustments, we can assert that this siren is louder than the muzzle blast, and for the most part louder than the supersonic cracks. And from this we can also see that the supersonic cracks up here are louder than the muzzle. Now this is the third burst of that volley. One way I have of validating this is by adjusting the gain. So if I adjust the gain down until it's all dark, then as I adjust the gain up, the loudest signals appear first. And so I just adjust it up and start to see something which we know is going to be the siren. So there's the siren. So the sirens are in this particular segment are the loudest. And then as we adjust it up, we start to see more stuff, all about the same, and then a little bit more, and we can start to see both the sonic and the muzzle blasts occur. So let's shrink this back down and move to the first volley. Alright, here we have the first volley. And let's run the same little experiment. Turn everything all the way down. And now we start rolling it up to find out who's louder than the other. So we roll it up. Oh, we start to see some sine waves, but we also start to see some up and down stuff. And as we roll it forward, we see that, except for this segment over there, they're all starting to appear at about the same time, which means that by and large these sounds are going, even though they occur at different frequency ranges, are going to be approximately the same intensity. Now how the ear interprets that is a whole different story, because the ear isn't a linear thing, it's a very non-linear thing, and it prefers frequencies in the human vocal range, which somewhere in the 2500 hertz range. So as we increase the gain on this, we'll find out that indeed they all continue to show up at about the same level. So for burst 1, both the supersonic cracks and the muzzles are going to sound just about as loud as the siren, wherever it may be. It's somewhere there on the road. So let's expand this out a little bit and see if we can garner any more information. Alright. Well, about the only thing we really see here is that there's this one segment right here. Right here. That is lacking the right portion of the siren. So for that particular one, we could start to assume that it was louder than the siren. That's not necessarily true, because there could be other explanations as to why. In other words, maybe the siren became softer. But it's an example of how you can look at these things and see what's louder, what's softer. So the first volley here is louder than the third. What about the second one? Well, if we hop on over to the second one and we do the same little thing, we expand it out so we can get a good idea of what's looking like. And we see some nice signature here. But you notice that we're lacking considerably much stuff up here in the range where the supersonic cracks are, but we have quite a bit of stuff where the muzzles are. So for burst 2 of Volley 5, we would assert that the muzzle blast is louder than the supersonic cracks. Now, relative to the siren, we see that the siren is much brighter than most of the muzzles, although here on the first muzzle blast it does look almost comparable. So we can try the little experiment with turning it all the way dark, and you can see now I don't have to, I can just fade it, that in this case nearly all of the gunshot sounds faded long before the siren. So once again, in this case for burst 2, the sirens are way more dominant than the gunshots, whereas in burst 1 they were comparable, and in Volley 3, burst 3, you have something similar to 2, but on a larger scale. What do I do? Change it so I can't even see them? Let's see. Shrink it down. There it is. Alright, so that's a little introduction to how I gauge relative intensities of things. Because at all times this particular body camera is adjusting its gain to accommodate all signals so that it can capture even the loudest one. And sometimes it fails. The cop cams are pretty notorious for clipping compared to the commercial phones. These little things over to the right on both the power screen, the power spectrogram and the frequency spectrogram, are vocalizations by something. Now there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes here. For example, if I turn the gain way up, you can see that there's lots of stuff everywhere that's happening, and you could set and spend a lifetime analyzing it all. Now in this case, I have these spectrograms set on a frequency, on a setting. I'm the master of the show here. I control all the volume. I control all the controls. Yeah, I'm set it at a sample size for the window of 1,000 individual little measurements. In other words, if we take a look at the waveform plot and we expand this waveform plot all the way out, we can see that these are individual samples where the little dots are. And up here in the log frequency spectrogram, this algorithm gathers up 1,000 of them to determine the frequency in that range, which means that I get a pretty good idea what the frequency is, but I get a less good idea of what time they actually occurred. And that's the basic dichotomy of a spectrogram. You can't know both the frequency and the timing with great accuracy at both times. You can know one or the other. So for example, if we bump this up to 4,000 samples per window, we can see that we start to be able to look at the frequencies very precisely and know what they are, but we lose when it occurred. So in this case, we use the frequency or the measurement tool up there, and we pull it down and we try to center it, and we come up with about 1,050 hertz, or with a low of 720 and a high of 1850, let's say. With the gunshots, you can see for the muzzles on the bottom end we have 146, and on the top end, let's see if I can find something here. It's kind of hard with all that other stuff in there. About 1,500, and then with the supersonic cracks, we have somewhere in the top end of 5,000, but oddly enough, they also go all the way down, maybe even a little bit more to the lower than the, in some instances, than the muzzle blast. And that's an indication of a very close encounter with a bullet when you have strong intensities along all frequencies for a supersonic crack. Normally they stop they appear on these things as oh, the bottom end is cut off. Let's just put it that way. Alright, so now on the other hand, if we drop this down to 512, which is my standard default, you can see how much this image changes. And if I drop it down even further to 128 samples per window size, you can see that things again appear completely different. While you still have the same information, it's the time is much more precise. So often when I want to know precisely when something occurred, I'll drop down into the 128 samples per window size, because it can give me much more precise readings. And then of course if I want the ultimate, I just expand this all the way out until I can look at one of these, which most of the time is not too useful, but let's see if we can catch the start of an event. Let's pick any one of these. How about the very first supersonic crack, which is this puppy. So I have to center it right on the center because that's where the expansion will occur. Right there. And then we'd start expanding out on the bottom here of the waveform. Yeah, and there you can see what the wave looks like on a very short time scale. In this case, it's on the order of 1 millisecond. About 1 millisecond for the entire thing. If I want to measure just the first half of the wave, it would be on the order of 748 microseconds, which is what I would expect. The supersonic cracks are pretty short in duration. All shock waves are, whether they're from the muzzle blast or from the supersonic cracks. They're all short, but the bullet, being a small device flying very quickly through the air, produces higher frequency sounds typically than the muzzle. Alright, so that's how I use this tool to gauge the relative loudness of sounds in some of the videos. And that comes in useful because if I can kind of measure the relative loudness of the sound, I can kind of tell a lot of things. For example, in this very specific example, the fact that the third burst was quieter than the first burst on the upper portion of the waveform, which is the supersonic crack, that means that the bullets were closer in the first burst than they were in the third. And by making those types of measurements repeatedly over many videos, you can start to do little graphs that show based upon the loudness of the supersonic crack, and assuming a direct path to the bullet, exactly where the path of the bullet may have been, and or inversely where the recording may have been if you know the path of the bullet. Well, that's enough technical details on that one. Catch you in the next one.